Hello, hobby friends. Today, I'm going to be changing tact a bit and doing some reinforcements for my Mordheim warband. In particular, today I am assembling a Landsknecht Ogre from Wargames Atlantic. I'm going to be using him as an ogre bodyguard for my captain in my warband called the Wine Swillers. They are a mercenaries warband of the Marienburg variety. I start off by using my God Hand 5.0 nippers or single-sided nippers to clip out the pieces and then start to glue them together. Being a high-quality plastics kit from Wargames Atlantic, very little finagling is needed to get them to go together well. Mainly plastic cement and everything went together, and then a bit of sanding, a bit of the back of the old hobby knife to scrape out the mold lines, and where the arms joined onto the body, I used a little bit of sprue glue. I kit bashed a bit his hand weapons, as I wanted to go 2 single-handed weapons instead of the 1 double-handed weapon. I went with the smallish looking sword pointed downwards in his left hand, and then chopped up the 2-handed axe into a single-handed axe for his right. For the base, I cut up some styrene sheet in a cobblestone effect into 2 pieces and fill in the gaps with some gravel to make it look like broken paving. Now for the first time, I'm going to use a wet pallet. Never used one before, but I was very excited. I will say though, I do think the army painter can have a few less pamphlets in their packaging. I think I pulled out 5 different catalogs or pamphlets in the different packages that were inside it. It was a bit over the top. I grabbed this particular pallet from Frontline Hobbies in Newcastle as an impulse buy. If you've never been and you live somewhere in New South Wales, you need to get to that shop. It is dangerous how much stuff they have there. Now, I'm not a painting expert, so this is not a painting guide. I'm just showing you how I approach it. I primed in Chaos Black with a Xenophil of white, then cracked out pale sand to cover over the areas where I'll either be using a contrast paint or a speed paint and doing any lighter colors or linen. In keeping with my warband's color scheme of tealy blue and dark purple, I applied multiple thin coats, starting with darker, working up, i.e. in purple, royal purple, then alien purple, squid ink, etc., and then the same again with the blue. In between, these thin coats that I was using made easier with a wet palette. I applied more pale sand to get a nice even coverage. I must say my first observation of using a wet palette is that it makes painting easier. Paints thin by themselves, they last longer, blending is easier. I am definitely going to be using this from now on. 100% an upgrade from the old frozen plate method. For the steel, I used some Vallejo aluminium along with a couple of drops of Liquitex inks of burnt umber and black. This applies amazingly well, such a smooth finish and great coverage. You do though have to make sure that it's constantly mixed. It will drop out of suspension quite easily. For sub-assemblies here, you can see that I've got the head stuck onto a piece of styrene pipe, and then the body I'm using here on a red grass painting handle, and then the base is just the base. Here I'm just using the properties of the wet palette to do some more highlights with just a nice fine glaze. And on the white, I'm just touching up the linen again, and then a little highlight of pure white to give a nice gentle transition. You may have noticed that I'm using a flat brush for all my base coating and also a lot of my highlighting. On a larger model with ridges like this, I find it makes it very easy to do. Because not only can you use the point of the brush, you have a nice broad flat bit to kind of dab on, as you can see what I'm doing here. Using a flat brush also means you can kind of slide up to edges or transition on the model and get paint really neatly right up to the edge. Here I'm applying some snakebite leather contrast for the leather straps. On the flesh, good old Gilliman's flesh tone. And then for anything else that's a dark brown like the wood, etc., I'm using Garagaxua. To highlight the flesh, I use a tip I got from Sonic Sledgehammer Studios channel. I mix a bit of Gilliman flesh with some pale sand and then highlight the ridges with that. If you haven't seen the Sonic Sledgehammer Studios channel, it's great. He does so many good tutorials on how to paint just basic everyday paint jobs that anyone can approach and do. Now, I wasn't too happy with how the metal was looking, so I made a fresh mix with a bit more burnt umber. Following this, I decided to glaze on some stubble. Using the wet palette, thinned down some rust grey and applied it over his chin till I got the effect I desired. It looked great. To blend the highlights and really make the colours punch on the clothing, I used some Druchii Violet and Tyrian Blue to shade. Onto the base now, and I used some grey to dry brush, and then I got out some super glue and tweezers and stuck lots of small micro grass all over it. Up and down the cracks to make it look like grass or weeds were growing in where the paver's broken up. I highly recommend that you grab yourself a good pair of tweezers. They make the task of applying the grass tufts like this or flowers so much easier. I used to use some simple home tweezers that you'd use for splinters, and they're terrible. Honestly, just get yourself some dedicated hobby tweezers. Following this, time to stick his head on. I used a bit of plastic glue cement and smooshed it in there, and all sealed up quite nicely. I then told a story with some blood. If you're going to apply blood, always tell a story with it. I put down a few footprints and then a spot where it looked like someone kind of sat down and bled out with a bloodied handprint. After this, I grabbed out good old Agrax Earthshade. I mixed it with some Lamia medium, about 50-50, and then slooshed and sloshed it everywhere. Nice and even, you know the story. Make sure you have a clean brush to mop on and off and apply and spread it about. This is even more important when you have a big model like this, because if you're not careful, you're going to leave a big splodge or tide lines will form, etc., and ruin all of your hard work. Now here is where a wet palette really comes into its own. After you've done your wash, you simply open the wet palette and those exact colors you were using are there, a little bit more thinned out, and you just glaze them on ever so gently. Fantastic. And here we are, 2 thin coats of Vallejo's matte varnish on, and I think it looks great. Anybody can approach this paint job and do just the same, I think. Let me know down below what you think of Massif Dorin or Mountainous Dorin joining my French-inspired with a Wine Swiller's warband. Like and subscribe and comment down below.